Hello everybody, you're watching the Son of the Morning channel and let's talk about Jonathan Hickman's X-Men. A lot has been said about Jonathan Hickman's X-Men. Depending who you talk to, it has been a little bit polarizing, although the series has been very successful. This of course starting with the House and Powers dual miniseries. One of the biggest criticisms is that although it's a good story, it's not an X-Men story. The X-Men have always been about doing their best for humanity, despite the distrust, fear, hate, violence, and genocide they experienced at the hands of humans. However, I feel that criticism happens if you're looking at Professor X and his merry band of mutants as the stars, whereas in Hickman's X-Men we are essentially dealing with all mutants, including the villains. And in the 57 years Marvel has been publishing X-Men stories, we know there are a lot more evil mutants than noble X-Men. So maybe this isn't an X-Men story at all. Maybe it's a mutant story. And considering that you have guys like Magneto and Apocalypse on your High Council, it may turn out that Hickman's mutants are Marvel's new bad guys. Personally, I think Hickman's X-Men are villains, or at very least, anti-heroes with an isolationist vibe. Now, I'm not going to review each issue of House and Powers and each X-Men book that followed. That would take too long. I'm just going to provide a synopsis of what's happened so far. Then tomorrow, February 26th, which is a Wednesday, X-Men 7 will be released. And I'll do a more formal review of that issue on its own. The story begins with the mutants, now living on the mutant island of Krakoa. They're taking flowers from Krakoa and planting them in key areas around the world, such as the X-Men headquarters, also other places like the Moon, Mars, the Savage Land, Washington, D.C., and in Jerusalem. Professor Charles Xavier telepathically invites world ambassadors to Jerusalem for a presentation on the new superpharmaceuticals that are produced by the flowers of Krakoa. Xavier's message being, recognize Krakoa as a sovereign nation and they can have access to these new drugs. Unexpectedly, the world ambassadors are surprised to be greeted by Magneto and not Professor Xavier. We learn there are still many groups that fear human extinction in favor of mutants, so Xavier's message was bound to rustle some feathers. Magneto takes the ambassadors on a tour of the habitats where Krakoan flowers were planted. When asked when they can tour Krakoa, Magneto denies them, and he tells them man is not welcome there. The X-Men start a migration for mutants to Krakoa, offering them all diplomatic immunity. Next, we have Charles meeting Moira McTaggart, which will become tremendously important. She seems to know Charles and asks him to read her mind. Charles reads her mind and he looks astonished. We're then taken on a ride through the ages, and it doesn't look like the human mutant problem has been fixed. Apocalyptic wars still rage. The humans of the future are turning to hybridizing themselves with future tech to basically become human sentinels. These wars wage across the solar system. The mutants also began hybridizing themselves during these wars, combining genetic material from several into a super mutant during these wars. And as we would come to find out later, mutants don't really die anymore. Hickman does a great job of reviving the Moira McTaggart character. She was a fairly mundane character until she dies, at which point she finds out that she is, in fact, a mutant, and her power is Upon death, she is reborn with the knowledge of her previous life/lives. She uses her knowledge to try to save mutant kind, as we see most of Moira's lives throughout this series. Moira and Charles decide that they need to go to Magneto. They go to Magneto so that Charles can telepathically show Magneto Moira's lives. And from there, Eric Lencher, Magneto, agrees to join the plan to save mutant kind in the future. What follows is another jump through history. More wars, human versus mutant, human versus Sentinel, human and Sentinel versus mutant, hybrid human versus mutant, Nimrod versus mutant. Unfortunately, even 1,000 years on, the mutants still don't seem to be winning this war. During one of these wars, Moira voluntarily has herself murdered so she can come back armed with the knowledge of Nimrod's arrival so that she can hopefully stop Nimrod altogether. In the present day, Cyclops leads a team to attack a mother mold and destroy the orbiting threat. They aren't successful. While this is going on, Emma Frost shows up in a courtroom. It was the courtroom where Sabretooth is on trial, and she invokes the immunity clause to get Sabretooth out of court and off to freedom in Krakoa. While on this mission, Xavier telepathically contacts Jean, who lets him know that there have been casualties. They are eventually successful at destroying the Mother Mold. Unfortunately, it requires Wolverine and Nightcrawler to literally hurl themselves into the sun with it, killing them both. Ultimately, nobody on this mission survives. I guess it's a good thing that mutants can't really die anymore, although I guess they don't know this yet. Charles then decides that he wants to copy all the DNA of all mutants to create a mass database for it, using the help of his sinister compadre here. 10 years after Charles has decided to create a database for all mutant DNA, Xavier takes Cypher deep into the heart of Krakoa to communicate with it, because he knows Cypher's powers will allow him to communicate with the living mutant planet. Charles tasks Cypher to create an interface system allowing the mutants to interact with the island. Finally, we learn about this new mutant immortality/regeneration process I've been speaking of. It is the result of the powers of 5 mutants known as the Five. The 5 are Gold Balls, Proteus, Elixir, Eva Bell, and Hope. We also learn that Charles is using Cerebro to copy the minds of all mutants, so with his database of mutant DNA and the 5 and their mixed abilities to create life, Charles is now well on his way to having it so that no mutant ever has to truly die again. At the same time that this mutant regeneration process is being lauded on Krakoa, Charles and Magneto worry about the upcoming vote on Krakoa at the United Nations. If they win the vote, or they do win the vote, and they now have 100 countries, which now they have trade deals with Krakoa, and there are many still in the negotiating phase. However, several nations have rejected the trade deals, and they are Iran, North Korea, Dr. Doom's Latveria, Russia, and Honduras, and all on the basis of political and ideological reasons. The other one that was holding back is Wakanda. They don't accept a trade deal simply because they feel they don't need the trade with Krakoa. Now that Krakoa has become a nation recognized by the UN, all sorts of villains are starting to show up on Krakoa. Some of the real villains, mutants, show up on Krakoa, such as Apocalypse. Yikes. Even more yikes? Charles welcomes him with open arms and shakes his hand. Who would have ever thought that you would see Charles Xavier and Apocalypse shaking hands? After another journey through time and a visit with Namor the Submariner, we're back here in the present time. Charles and Magneto are trying to convince Emma Frost to aid in the establishment of Krakoa. They ask her to recruit the Hellfire Corporation to be the black market for Krakoan drugs to countries without trade deals. 1,000 years on, Nimrod is up to no good, and he is still playing around with black holes. As I said, there was a lot of jumping through history on this one. Soon we learn that there is a quiet council governing Krakoa that's being put together, and it's comprised of 14 mutants led by Charles, Magneto, Apocalypse, and Mr. Sinister. After much deliberation on the Quiet Council, the Council decides that there are to be 3 main laws of Krakoa. Number 1, mutants need to reproduce. Make more mutants. Number 2, murdering humans is forbidden. Murder no man. And number 3, respect this sacred land. To respect and not harm the land on Krakoa. This unfortunately doesn't go too well for Sabretooth, who had murdered a human even though they took him out of court. So he is unfortunately put in a prison in Krakoa. 1,000 years in the future, Moira has Wolverine kill her so in her next life she could prevent the ascension of the hybrid humans. We flip back to year 1 where Charles reads Moira's mind, and we learn that the astonishment on his face from this same scene at the beginning of the series, and it appeared in other parts of the series, is because no matter what they do, the mutants will always lose. She is using her last life to show this to Charles. We end off 10 years later. Magneto is still committed to protecting mutants. He says he's proud of who he is, and he invites the world to try to get in his way. Classic Magneto. And that's how the House of X, Powers of X story comes to a conclusion. So after House and Powers were finished, I expected it to spin off into an ongoing X-Men series. I wasn't expecting it to spin off into 6 different series. There's no way I was going to spend that kind of money on the X-Men stories. Marvel really does test the good faith of their customers when they do stuff like that. I decided I would follow the titled series. However, curiosity got the best of me and I tried out one of the other series. It was okay, so I tried one more. I won't say which one it was, but reading it actually made me angry. This has never happened to me before. I've not liked stuff, sure, but this comic made me so it made me so mad that I said screw it. I'm just gonna stick with the titled X-Men series, and that's all fine and good with me. The first issue was fine enough. The mutants are all getting used to their new surroundings on Krakoa. Everyone's having fun. Nothing wrong with that. I will say that Hickman did almost lose me in the second issue of the titled X-Men series. It's both ridiculous and hilarious what goes on in this issue. The idea of Krakoa seeking out another island to mate with, to me, is just hilarious and ridiculous. But the reason why they almost lost me was because I came to know that Charles Xavier had been killed in one of these other series going on. This annoyed me, but hey, We know he isn't going to be dead for long, so whatever. So what I decided I was going to do with this X-Men series was then treat each issue like a standalone story. Sort of like the old Avengers comics. Some characters pop in and out, go on hiatus, join another team, and come back. And those old Avengers stories, they were like one book, one story, not too many big arcs. And Hickman does a good job of allowing us to read in this way by having a page near the beginning of each issue showing which characters would be featured in that issue of the comic. Since then, I've really settled into the series as interesting one-off stories, and I've been enjoying them this way. For that reason, I'm not going to review each issue on this video. I'll just say I'm liking the series. The last issue had a really great plot line with Mystique involved. Really liking the series. And we'll start the single issue reviews tomorrow, February 26th, when issue number 7 comes out, because we're filming here on a Tuesday, February the 25th. At any rate, those are my thoughts on Hickman's X-Men so far. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you liked the video, hit the subscribe button. It all helps. At any rate, I am the Son of the Morning, and I want to thank you for joining me here today.